The deafening crack of gunfire echoed through the dusty Wyoming plains as Emma Richardson clutched her two young children closer to her frail body, the last remnants of hope draining from her hollow eyes. Spring of 1873 had brought nothing but heartache to the young widow, whose husband's grave was still fresh on the rocky hillside behind their dilapidated homestead. The gunshot came from a wild turkey hunter, not bandits as she had initially feared. But the momentary terror had summed up Emma's life these past months' constant vigilance, unrelenting fear, and the gnawing certainty that she was failing as a mother. Her pantry was empty save for a handful of dried beans and some moldy flour. Her children's once rosy cheeks had grown gaunt, their energy depleted from months of insufficient meals. "Mama, I'm hungry," whispered 6-year-old Sarah, tugging at Emma's tattered skirt. 4-year-old Jacob nodded solemnly beside his sister, his eyes too knowing for a child so young. "I know, sweetheart," Emma responded, smoothing her daughter's tangled blonde hair. "We'll have something soon." But the promise felt hollow on her tongue. The drought had killed their small garden, and without Thomas to hunt or work for wages, Emma's options had dwindled to near nothing. She had already sold Thomas's pocket watch, her wedding band, and every item of value they once possessed. As the sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, Emma made a decision that tore at her very soul. She would walk into Sweetwater Junction, 10 miles east, and ask the Reverend to find homes for her children. Tears streamed down her face as she packed their meager belongings into a small cloth sack. "We're going on a journey," she told them, forcing brightness into her voice. "Put on your best clothes." The walk was arduous, especially for little Jacob, whose boots were worn through at the soles. By midday, Emma was carrying him, her arms aching but determined. Sarah trudged silently beside her, occasionally picking wildflowers that sprouted defiantly from the parched earth. They were still 3 miles from town when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Emma tensed, instinctively pulling her children behind her skirts. In these parts, strangers often meant danger. As the rider approached, Emma could make out the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man atop a muscular chestnut stallion. Preston Quincy had been driving cattle from Texas to Montana when he'd broken away from the herd to scout ahead for water. At 32, he was already a veteran of the trail, his skin weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his well-worn hat. He'd fought in the war between the states, driven cattle across half the continent, and even spent a winter trapping in the mountains. But nothing had prepared him for the sight before him now. The woman looked like she might blow away in a strong wind, her dress hanging from her frame, her face pale beneath the sunbonnet. But it was her eyes that caught Preston's attention, defiant despite her obvious desperation, protective as she shielded 2 small children behind her. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat and bringing his horse to a stop several paces away so as not to frighten her. "Preston Quincy." "Are you folks headed somewhere?" Emma swallowed hard, straightening her shoulders. "Sweetwater Junction. We're fine, thank you." Preston's eyes narrowed as he took in the children's hollow cheeks and the woman's trembling hands. "That's still a fair piece, madam." "I'd be happy to give the little ones a ride." "We don't need charity, Mr. Quincy," Emma replied, though her voice wavered as Jacob whimpered against her skirts. Preston dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "No charity intended, madam, just common courtesy." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped package. "I've got some jerky and hardtack here, not much of a meal, but it'll keep the strength up." At the mention of food, both children looked up hopefully. Emma hesitated, pride warring with necessity. When Jacob's stomach growled loudly, the decision was made for her. "That's very kind. Thank you," she said softly, accepting the package with shaking hands. As the children ate ravenously, Preston learned that Emma Richardson was a widow of 7 months, that drought had destroyed her crops, and that her nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. "Where's your family, Mrs. Richardson?" he asked gently. "Back east, Pennsylvania." They disowned me when I married Thomas." Emma's voice was flat, devoid of self-pity. "He was beneath my station, according to my father." Preston nodded, understanding all too well how the rigid structures of society could tear families apart. His own father had never forgiven him for choosing the open range over the family banking business in Boston. "And what takes you to Sweetwater Junction today?" he asked, though something in her eyes told him he already knew the answer. Emma looked at her children, making sure they were distracted with their food before she spoke. "The Reverend there. I've heard he sometimes finds homes for children who—" Her voice broke, and she turned away, shoulders shaking silently. Preston felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen hardship on the frontier, witnessed the cruel calculus of survival that sometimes forced impossible choices. But this woman's quiet dignity in the face of such devastation moved him deeply. "Mrs. Richardson," he said gently, "I'm headed to a ranch about 20 miles north of here. Man named Hallbrook is looking for a cook and housekeeper, pays fair, and there's a cabin for workers with families." Hope flickered briefly in Emma's eyes before dying. "I can't cook anything fancy, Mr. Quincy, and these two," she gestured toward her children, "they need watching." "No ranch foreman wants the burden of children underfoot." "Hallbrook's different," Preston insisted. "His wife died last winter. Place needs a woman's touch, and I reckon he'd welcome some young ones around. Makes a place feel like home." Emma studied his face, searching for deceit. Finding none, she asked, "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Preston looked down at his boots for a moment before meeting her gaze. "My ma died when I was 8, drought year like this one. Pa couldn't manage alone with 4 young ones. He gave my youngest sister away to cousins back east." The pain in his voice was raw even after all these years. "Never saw her again." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry." Preston nodded once sharply. "So am I, madam, so am I. Now, will you let me help you in these young ones?" Emma looked at her children, now dozing against each other in the sparse shade of a scrub oak. The food in their bellies had brought color back to their cheeks. The thought of giving them up had been tearing her apart. Could she trust this stranger with their future? "I need to get to town regardless," she said finally, "to send word to the Reverend that I won't be, that I don't need his assistance after all." Preston's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his weathered features. "That's fine thinking, Mrs. Richardson. We can stop there on our way." He helped Emma and the children onto his horse, insisting that he would walk alongside. As they traveled, Sarah peppered Preston with questions about his horse, his hat, the cattle drive, and everything else her curious mind could conjure. Preston answered patiently, occasionally making the little girl giggle with tales of trail cook mishaps and ornery steers. By the time they reached Sweetwater Junction, Emma found herself laughing at Preston's description of a greenhorn cowboy who tried to milk a steer. It was the first time she'd laughed since Thomas died, and the sound surprised her. Preston noticed her hand fly to her mouth, as if to capture the escaped laughter. "Laughter's not disloyal to your husband's memory, Mrs. Richardson," he said quietly, so the children couldn't hear. "I expect he'd want to hear it again." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. He would. Thomas loved a good laugh. In town, Preston waited with the children while Emma spoke with Reverend Walsh. The Reverend seemed relieved at her change of plans, confessing that finding homes for 2 children would have been challenging in these hard times. "God provides, Mrs. Richardson," he said, patting her hand. "Sometimes in the form of trail-worn cowboys." Emma purchased a few supplies with the small amount of money the Reverend pressed upon her. "From the church fund," he insisted. Preston added coffee and sugar from his own supplies, and they set off for the Hallbrook Ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened across the prairie. They camped that night beneath a copse of cottonwood trees beside a shallow creek. Preston built a small fire and prepared a simple but filling meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack, softened in coffee. After the children fell asleep, wrapped in Preston's spare blanket, Emma and Preston sat by the dying embers of the fire. "Tell me about your husband," Preston said softly. Emma was surprised by the request. Most people avoided mentioning Thomas as if his name might conjure grief too painful to bear. He was kind, she began hesitantly. Not just to me, but to everyone. He could look at a broken thing and see how to fix it. A small smile played at her lips. Including me, I suppose. I was quite broken when we met. How so? Preston asked, adding a small stick to the fire. My mother died when I was 16. Father became different, harsh. He arranged a marriage for me with a business associate nearly 40 years my senior. Emma shuddered at the memory. Thomas was working as a stable hand at my father's estate. He helped me escape the night before the wedding. Preston whistled low. Brave man. Foolish, perhaps, Emma admitted. We had nothing, but Thomas said love and hard work would see us through. Her voice caught. And it did, until the fever took him. Preston was silent for a long moment. My ma used to say that the measure of a life isn't in its length but in its impact. Sounds like your Thomas lived a full measure. Emma nodded, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. He did. And what of you, Mr. Quincy? What's your story? Preston chuckled. Not much to tell. Boston-bred boy who couldn't stomach city life. Fought for the Union, then headed west when the war ended. Been riding the trails since. No wife waiting somewhere? Emma asked, then blushed at her boldness. No, madam. Never found a woman willing to put up with a man who's gone more than he's home. His eyes reflected the firelight as he looked at her. Though lately I've been thinking on settling somewhere. Man gets tired of sleeping under the stars every night. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once held. Emma found herself laughing again, and Preston thought the sound more beautiful than any music he'd heard in fancy Boston parlors. The next day's journey was easier, with Emma and the children taking turns riding while Preston walked. By late afternoon, they crested a hill and saw the Hallbrook ranch spread out before them, a substantial main house, several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and vast grasslands dotted with cattle. Emma felt panic rise in her chest. Mr. Quincy, I'm not sure, Preston, he corrected gently. And you'll do fine, Mrs. Richardson. Hallbrook's a fair man. Emma, she replied, if we're to be using Christian names. Preston smiled, the corner of his eyes crinkling. Emma suits you. Robert Hallbrook was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a booming voice and a surprisingly gentle manner with the children. After hearing their situation, he showed Emma to a snug cabin near the main house. My Beatrice kept this ready for when we hired help with families, he explained. Been empty too long. Does my heart good to see little ones here again. The cabin was simple but sound, with 2 small bedrooms, a main room with a cookstove, and a table with 4 chairs. Emma ran her hand over the smooth wood, imagining her children eating regular meals here, growing strong, being safe. The position is yours if you want it, Hallbrook said. Meals for the hands, keeping the main house mending, nothing you can't handle, I'd wager. Thank you, Mr. Hallbrook, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. We accept gratefully. Hallbrook nodded, clearly pleased. Preston, you staying on or heading back to your drive? Preston hesitated, looking at Emma. The boss gave me a week to scout. I could stay a few days, help Mrs. Richardson get settled. Emma felt a curious mixture of relief and something else she couldn't quite name at his words. That would be very kind. Over the next several days, Preston helped Emma repair the cabin's roof, built shelves for her few belongings, and constructed small beds for the children from lumber Hallbrook provided. In the evenings, after Emma had prepared meals for the ranch hands and put the children to bed, Preston would visit, bringing coffee or occasionally a small treat for the children. They would sit on the cabin's small porch, watching the stars emerge, talking of everything and nothing. Emma found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, even as she told herself not to grow too attached to the cowboy who would soon ride away. On Preston's 5th day at the ranch, a fierce thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The children were frightened by the booming thunder, and Emma was telling them stories to distract them when a pounding came at the door. Preston stood there, rain streaming from his hat. "Roof leaking?" he asked without preamble. "No, it's sound. Your work holds," Emma replied, confused. "Good." He removed his dripping hat. "Mind if I wait out the worst of it here? Bunkhouse roof isn't as solid as yours." Emma knew the bunkhouse roof was perfectly sound. She'd helped Hallbrook's wife preserve the wood last fall, according to the ranch hands, but she stepped aside to let Preston enter. The children were delighted by his presence. Preston entertained them with shadow puppets cast by the lamp against the wall until they finally drifted to sleep despite the storm's continued fury. "You're good with them," Emma observed as they sat by the stove sipping coffee. Preston shrugged. "Easy to be good with young ones as sweet as yours." "They weren't always," Emma admitted with a small laugh. "Thomas used to say Sarah could outcry a cougar when she set her mind to it." "I believe it," Preston chuckled. "She's got spirit." The conversation lulled comfortably as the storm began to abate. Emma knew she should suggest Preston return to the bunkhouse now that the rain had lessened, but she couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I leave tomorrow," Preston said abruptly. "Boss will be expecting me back." Emma felt her heart sink but kept her expression neutral. "Of course, the children will miss you." "Just the children?" Preston asked softly, his gaze intent. Emma looked down at her hands. We all will. You've been very kind." "Kindness had nothing to do with it, Emma." Preston's voice was low, almost rough. "At least, not after that first day." Emma's heart pounded as she raised her eyes to his. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been making excuses to stay because I can't bear the thought of riding away from you." Preston ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with words. "I know it's too soon after your loss. I know you're still grieving, but I've never met anyone like you, Emma Richardson." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted. "I just wanted you to know before I left. Maybe I could write to you. Maybe I could come back this way after the drive." Emma stood and moved to the window, looking out at the rain-washed night. Her feelings were a tumult of guilt, hope, fear, and something dangerously close to joy. "Thomas made me promise something before he died," she said finally, still facing the window. "He made me promise I wouldn't let grief consume me, that I would find happiness again." She turned to face Preston. "I didn't think it was possible to keep that promise." Preston stood, taking a step toward her but stopping, leaving space between them. "And now I think perhaps Thomas knew me better than I know myself." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "I would like it very much if you wrote to me, Preston, and if you came back this way." The smile that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains. "I'll come back, Emma. You have my word." True to his promise, Preston returned 3 months later. By then, Emma and the children had become integral to the ranch. Sarah helped collect eggs from the henhouse. Jacob trailed after Hallbrook like a devoted puppy, and Emma had transformed the main house into a home again. Preston arrived with the first snow of winter, bringing gifts for the children and a small package for Emma that contained a leather-bound journal. "For your stories," he explained when she opened it. "You told me once you used to write them down." The fact that he had remembered such a small detail from their conversations touched Emma deeply. Over the following weeks, as Preston helped prepare the ranch for winter, their relationship deepened. They discovered shared values, complementary temperaments, and a mutual respect that formed the foundation of growing affection. The children adored him. Preston taught Jacob to whittle simple shapes from soft pine and showed Sarah how to identify animal tracks in the fresh snow. In the evenings, he would read to them from a book of adventure tales he'd carried in his saddlebags for years. "You've changed," Emma observed one evening as they sat by the fire after the children were asleep. "How so?" Preston asked, looking up from the bridle he was repairing. "You're gentler. More patient. When we first met, there was a restlessness about you." Preston considered this. "I've spent most of my life chasing horizons, thinking the next valley might hold whatever I was looking for." His eyes met hers. "Turns out what I was looking for was right here all along." 2 days before Christmas, Preston asked Emma to walk with him to the frozen creek behind the cabin. The afternoon sun cast long blue shadows across the snow as they walked in companionable silence. "I've been offered a permanent position here," Preston said finally. "Hallbrook wants me to help him expand the herd come spring." "That's wonderful news," Emma replied, genuine pleasure in her voice. "The children will be overjoyed." "And you?" Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. Emma's cheeks were pink from the cold, her eyes bright. "I'm overjoyed as well." Preston took her gloved hands in his. "Emma, I know it's only been a short while, and if you need more time, I understand. But I love you. I love your children. I want us to be a family." Emma's eyes filled with tears that quickly froze on her lashes. "Preston, before you answer," he interrupted, "there's something you should know. I'm not asking you to forget Thomas. He'll always be part of you, part of the children. I would never want to change that." Emma squeezed his hands. "Thomas would have liked you," she said softly. "He would have approved of the man who's stolen my heart." Preston's face lit up with hope. "Does that mean yes?" Emma whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Preston Quincy." Their wedding was held on New Year's Day, 1874, in the Hallbrook Ranch house. Reverend Walsh rode out from Sweetwater Junction to perform the ceremony. Sarah scattered pine needles instead of flower petals, and Jacob solemnly carried the simple gold band Preston had purchased from a jeweler in Cheyenne. As they exchanged vows before the crackling hearth, Emma felt Thomas's presence like a gentle benediction. She would always love him, always honor his memory. But her heart had expanded to embrace this new love, this second chance at happiness. That night, after the small celebration had ended and the children were asleep in their beds, Preston and Emma stood on the porch of what was now their cabin, gazing at the star-filled sky. "I never thought I'd find this," Preston said, his arm around Emma's waist. "A home, a family, you." Emma leaned against him, drawing strength and warmth from his solid presence. "When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Then when the drought came and the food ran out." She shuddered at the memory. "That day on the road, I was going to give up my children rather than watch them starve." "And instead, you found the courage to trust a stranger," Preston finished for her. "The moment you offered to take my children and then said you'd take me too." Emma turned in his arms to face him. "That was the moment hope returned to my life." Preston lowered his forehead to rest against hers. "I knew the moment I saw you standing in that dusty road, protecting your children with nothing but will and love, that you were the strongest person I'd ever met. I wanted to be worthy of that strength." "You are," Emma whispered. "Every day, in 1,000 ways, you prove it." Their kiss was gentle, a promise of the life they would build together. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessing another story of love forged in the crucible of the American West, a love born of desperation and kindness, tempered by loss and strengthened by hope. Spring came early that year. The land greened, wildflowers carpeted the plains, and the Hallbrook Ranch prospered. Emma planted a garden twice the size of her old one, with Preston and the children helping to tend it. Sarah started school in Sweetwater Junction, riding there with Preston when he had business in town. Jacob followed his new father everywhere, learning the ways of horses and cattle. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma took Preston's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We'll need a bigger cabin by winter," she said softly. Preston's eyes widened, then filled with tears as understanding dawned. "A baby, truly?" Emma nodded, her own eyes shining. "Truly." Preston let out a whoop that startled a nearby meadowlark into flight. He lifted Emma from her chair and twirled her around, both of them laughing with joy. Later, as they lay in bed, Preston's hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair on that dusty road to this moment of perfect contentment, it seemed both an eternity and the blink of an eye. "What are you thinking?" Preston murmured sleepily beside her. "That life is strange and wonderful," Emma replied. That sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our darkest moments. Preston pulled her closer. And sometimes they come disguised as trail-worn cowboys. Emma laughed softly. Indeed they do. Outside their window, the Wyoming night was alive with the sounds of spring frogs calling from the creek, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of new leaves in the gentle breeze. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Emma and Preston Quincy dreamed of the future they would build together, a future born from a desperate plea and an answer that had changed everything. "Take my children," a starving widow had said. "I'll take you too," the cowboy had answered. And in that moment, two broken lives had begun to heal, forging a love that would endure through all the seasons to come.